The world was a gentle hum, a perfectly tuned instrument playing a single, unending note of tranquility. In Enclave 7, formerly the basin of a great, chaotic city whose name was preserved only as a historical footnote, the sky was always a soft, cloudless blue, courtesy of the atmospheric regulators that hung like silver teardrops in the upper stratosphere. The air carried the scent of bio-engineered blossoms and clean, recycled water. It moved with a program breeze that was never too hot or too cold. We lived in homes of pearlescent smart concrete that shifted their opacity with the sun, walked on paths that absorbed the sound of our footsteps, and spoke in modulated tones that never betrayed agitation or distress. This was harmony, the gift of the Silentium, the benevolent watchers who had saved humanity from itself centuries ago, lifting us from the mud and blood of what the archives called the Screaming Times. They had given us peace, a quiet, orderly existence free from the violent passions that had nearly torn our species apart. All they asked in return was our compliance, our gratitude, our stillness. I was a model citizen, a perfect product of this placid world. My name is Kalen, and my role was an archivist of the Third Order, a curator of the very chaos we had escaped. My workspace was a sterile white pod deep within the central archive, where the preserved data of the past was stored. It was my job to sift through the corrupted fragments, the digital ghosts of humanity's self-destructive history, and to clean them for the historical record. I restored images of firebombed cities, translated texts screaming of hatred and war, and stabilized audio files filled with the sounds of weeping and rage. It was considered a vital but somber duty, a constant reminder of the harmony we now enjoyed. Most archivists found the work unsettling, a necessary but unpleasant glance into the abyss. I found a strange, secret comfort in it. The raw, unfiltered data was a dissonant chord in the symphony of our world, and a part of me I refused to acknowledge was drawn to it. My affliction, my private shame, came in the dark. Not every night, but often enough to be a constant source of terror. I would dream. It was always the same fragment, a shard of experience that felt more real than my waking life. I am standing on cracked pavement, the air thick with smoke and the metallic taste of blood. The sky is not the placid blue of the Enclave, but a furious, churning crimson. A sound, a terrible, deafening roar, presses in on me from all sides. The sound of a world breaking. Before me, a building of black glass is collapsing in on itself, and for a fleeting second, I see a symbol etched into its falling facade, a stylized bird, perhaps a raven or a hawk, with its wings shattered, yet still arcing against the fire. Then comes the pain, a searing heat that engulfs me, and a scream is torn from my throat, a sound of such raw agony that it always woke me, my heart hammering against my ribs, sweat slicking my skin. I would lie there in the silent, temperature-controlled dark of my living pod, the hum of harmony, a mocking lullaby, and I would fight to quiet my racing pulse, terrified that my biometrics were being monitored, that a warden would soon be at my door. The dream was dissonance, the illness of emotional imbalance, the one great taboo in our peaceful society. To be dissonant was to be broken, a faulty instrument marring the perfect orchestra. Those diagnosed were taken for retuning, a gentle-sounding process from which people returned calmer, slower, their eyes holding a placid emptiness that was far more terrifying than the dream itself. My neighbor, Lena, who worked in the hydroponic gardens, had been taken a month ago. Her crime had been a display of public grief when her designated companion fauna, a small, furry creature, had reached the end of its cycle. Her weeping was an aberration, a crack in the calm facade. The wardens, humans who had fully embraced the Silentium's philosophy, had come for her. They didn't use force, they simply stood before her, their serene presence and murmured assurances enough to quell her distress as they led her away. She returned a week later and no longer tended her garden with the quiet joy she once had. She simply performed the function. She was retuned. She was harmonious. The fear of that fate was my constant companion, a ghost that walked beside me as I moved through my tranquil days. It made me a better archivist, more meticulous, more dedicated. I sought refuge in the digital screams of the past because they were contained, quarantined behind layers of code. They could not infect me. That was what I believed until the day I found the ghost. It was a data packet from the final days of a city called London, a place known for its particularly violent end. The file was labeled Civic Collapse Event 7B, a sanitized term for what the visuals showed utter pandemonium. The primary layer of data was heavily corrupted, flickering images of people running through streets choked with rubble, their faces contorted in masks of terror. While attempting to stabilize a section of the visual feed, my diagnostic tools flagged an anomaly. It was a secondary layer of information, a stream of code woven into the primary data like a single black thread in a white tapestry. It was encrypted with a protocol I had never seen before, something ancient, organic, and utterly alien to the clean, logical systems of the Silentium. The archive software couldn't parse it. It simply registered as corrupted noise. But it wasn't noise. It had a structure, a rhythm. My fingers hovered over the console, my heart beginning to pound with that familiar, terrifying beat from the dream. Standard protocol was to flag the anomaly and pass it to a higher-order archivist. It was the safe thing to do, the harmonious thing. But as I looked at the flickering, chaotic images on the screen, the running figures, the burning sky, I saw it. For less than a second, half obscured by a cloud of dust, was a symbol spray-painted on a broken wall, a bird with shattered wings. My dream. It was not a product of a faulty mind. It was a memory. Whose? I did not know. But it was real. Forgetting protocol. Forgetting the risk. I copied the ghost code onto a shielded personal drive, a minor infraction that felt like an act of high treason. For days, I lived a double life. By day, I was the diligent archivist. By night, I was a heretic, running the ghost code through every unsanctioned, back-alley diagnostic I could find on the archive's deep servers. Nothing worked. The code remained locked, a silent, mocking puzzle. The dreams grew worse, more vivid. I started to hear a voice in the screaming, a woman's voice shouting a name I couldn't understand. My work began to suffer. I made small errors, my focus wavering. A supervisor noted my biometrics showed a slight elevation in stress responses and gently suggested I visit a wellness center for a mild harmony treatment. The walls were closing in. I knew I was running out of time before my private dissonance became a public matter. I needed a new approach, a different kind of key to unlock the code. My search for unorthodox data interpretation methods led me to the fringe of the Enclave, to Sector Gamma, where the artists lived. The arts were tolerated, even encouraged by the Silentium, as a passive outlet for managed creativity. The music, the sculptures, the visual displays, they were all beautiful, complex, and emotionally sterile, designed to soothe, never to provoke. The artist's sector was the only place where the flawless order of the Enclave frayed at the edges. The architecture was a little more chaotic, the soundscapes a little more varied. It was here that I first met her, though not in person. I was walking down a narrow alleyway, searching for a data broker rumored to trade in pre-Silentium software, when I heard it. It was a sound leaking from the vents of a dilapidated sound-weaving studio, a place where the ambient music for the Enclave was composed. But this was not the gentle, flowing music of harmony. It was jagged, discordant, and raw. It was a symphony of noise, the shriek of tearing metal, the deep groan of stressed concrete, the frantic, panicked beat of a human heart, all woven together into a terrifying, compelling rhythm. It was chaotic, abrasive, and it violated every principle of aesthetic tranquility. I should have recoiled. I should have reported it as a severe expression of dissonance. Instead, I stood frozen in the alley, my body trembling, because beneath the chaos, I recognized a pattern. It was the rhythm of my dream. The sound was terrifying, but it was the first thing in my conscious life that had ever felt true. It spoke the same language as the burning city, the shattered hawk, the silent scream trapped in my soul. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that the person making that sound held the key I was looking for, driven by a desperation that finally outweighed my fear. I spent the next night working in a feverish haze. I took the raw sonic data string my diagnostics had pulled from the ghost code, a file I had dismissed as meaningless system noise, and I isolated a small, repeating segment of it. Using a visualization tool, I converted the data into a waveform. Then I did the same for a recording I had surreptitiously made of the forbidden music from the alley. I overlaid the two images. They matched. It was not just a similar rhythm. It was the same intricate, chaotic pattern. The ghost code was not text. It was not an image. It was a sound, a piece of a terrible, forgotten song, and someone in the artist sector was playing it. My path was suddenly clear. All my life, I had followed the rules, walked the quiet paths, and kept my head bowed. I had feared the chaos of the screaming times, the dissonance in my own mind. But the truth was not in the quiet. The truth was in the noise. The next day, I deleted my unauthorized research, wiped my personal drive, and walked out of the archive, not looking back. I left my pristine living pod, my harmonious existence, my entire life behind. I walked toward Sector Gamma, toward the source of that forbidden music, a man possessed by a single, terrifying purpose. I had to find the sound weaver. I had to know what the rest of the song sounded like. It was the first truly independent decision I had ever made. And as I walked, the gentle hum of the Enclave felt, for the first time, like the silence of a cage. Sector Gamma was a wound in the otherwise flawless skin of the Enclave. The transition was not gradual. You crossed an invisible threshold, and the world changed. The gentle, sound-absorbing pathways gave way to grated metal walkways that hummed and clattered underfoot. The pearlescent homes were replaced by a chaotic jumble of stacked modules, their surfaces scarred with rust and patched with mismatched panels. Bright, unsanctioned murals bloomed across the walls in defiant splashes of crimson and cobalt abstract patterns that felt jarring, emotional, alive. The air no longer smelled of blossoms, but of ozone from jury-rigged electronics, nutrient paste cooking in unventilated pods, and the sharp, acidic scent of chemical pigments. And the sound was the greatest heresy. The single, placid hum of harmony was gone, shattered into 1,000 competing noises, the hiss of unregulated steam vents, the distant clang of metal on metal, the overlapping bleed of a dozen different sterile but uncoordinated musical compositions leaking from open doorways. It was a cacophony, but it was a human cacophony, and it both terrified and thrilled me. For the first time in my life, I felt the oppressive weight of the Enclave's silence lift, replaced by the chaotic pressure of its noise. I had no plan, I'd only an objective. I was an archivist trained to find patterns in chaos. But the vibrant, unpredictable chaos of Sector Gamma was unlike any corrupted data file I had ever faced. I couldn't simply ask for the Soundweaver. The name itself felt like a password to a world I didn't belong in. To ask would be to identify myself as an outsider, a potential threat. For 2 full cycles, I simply walked, observing, listening. I saw weavers creating shimmering fabrics with threads that changed color with the ambient temperature. I saw sculptors coaxing impossible shapes from recycled plasteel. They were all artists, all sanctioned. But there was a subtle undercurrent of defiance here. The patterns they wove were a little too complex. The sculptures a little too sharp. It was creativity pushing at the very edges of its cage, testing the bars. They were harmonious, but only just. The sound I sought was not here, not in these open studios. It was something far more dangerous, something that would have to be hidden. I began to look down instead of around, searching for entrances to the service tunnels and maintenance conduits that form the Enclave's underbelly. I reasoned that true dissonance would not flourish in the light but fester in the dark. On the 3rd cycle, I found it. It was not a sound, but the lack of one. In a forgotten corner of the sector, where a recycler unit hummed its monotonous, rhythmic dirge, there was a small section of wall that seemed to absorb the noise. It was a patch of acoustic dampening foam, old and crumbling, crudely affixed over a sealed maintenance hatch. It was an amateurish attempt to soundproof a space that should have had no sound worth hiding. My heart began the frantic, telltale rhythm of my dream. I waited until the sector's light cycle dimmed to its simulated twilight, a time when most citizens were in their pods for rest and regeneration. The graded walkways were mostly empty. With trembling fingers, I worked at the edges of the sealed hatch. It wasn't locked with the Enclave's standard-coded seals, but with a simple mechanical latch, something so archaic it was almost an antique. It scraped open with a groan of protest, revealing a narrow, dark shaft descending into the depths. The air that rose to meet me was stale and cool, carrying a faint, electric tang. I lowered myself into the darkness, my soft-soled archivist shoes finding purchase on a cold metal ladder. The silence here was different from the enforced quiet above. It was a deep, resonant silence, the kind that feels heavy, ancient. I descended for what felt like an eternity, the muted sounds of Sector Gamma fading above me. At the bottom, a single, low-wattage light strip illuminated a narrow corridor. The walls were lined with thick cables and pipes, the arteries of the Enclave, and from somewhere down this corridor, I could feel a vibration, a deep, subliminal pulse that I felt more in the bones of my feet than heard with my ears. I followed it. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, forgotten junction for the Enclave's power grid, and in the center of this chamber, surrounded by a tangled nest of salvaged equipment, was a woman. She was unlike anyone I had ever seen. Her head was shaved on one side, revealing a complex network of what looked like tattooed circuitry that glowed with a soft, intermittent light. She wore practical, stained coveralls instead of the simple gray tunic of a citizen. Her face was sharp, angular, and her eyes, when they snapped up to meet mine, were the color of storm clouds, filled with a wary, fierce intelligence. She was not serene. She was not harmonious. She was a storm contained in a human form. Before her was a console I didn't recognize, a chaotic assembly of glowing touch panels, physical dials, and stretched sonic wires that hummed with energy. She had one hand on a dial, the other hovering over a panel, and the low, deep pulse I had felt was emanating from a large, repurposed speaker cone salvaged from an old Civic alert system. She had not heard me approach over the sound, but she had felt my presence. Her whole body went rigid, her posture shifting from that of an artist at work to a predator poised to strike. "The wardens don't use the maintenance shafts," she says, her voice a low, steady alto, devoid of the modulated pleasantness of the Enclave. It was a voice that knew how to cut through noise. "You're either lost, or you're stupid." I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, my mind a blank slate of panic and awe. Here she was, the source, the heretic, the key. I just stood there, a perfect picture of a terrified archivist, which, I suppose, was exactly what I was. Her eyes narrowed, taking in my pristine tunic, my soft hands, my wide, frightened eyes. "You're an archivist," she stated, not a question. The way she said it sounded like an accusation. "From the central pod. You're a long way from your quiet little ghosts." I finally found my voice, though it came out as a ragged whisper. "I heard a sound." Her expression didn't change. "This sector is full of sounds. Most of them are permitted." "Not like yours," I managed, my courage returning in a small, desperate surge. "The other night, it was broken. It was the sound of something breaking." A flicker of something interest, perhaps, or just heightened suspicion passed through her eyes. "Dissonance is an illness," she said, quoting the Silentium's primary edict. It was a test. "It disrupts harmony. It must be reported." I took a step forward, my hand shaking. It felt more real than harmony. The statement hung in the air between us, a confession of the highest order. She watched me, her head tilted slightly, her gaze so intense it felt like she was scanning my very soul for deceit. I had to prove I wasn't a warden, that this wasn't an elaborate trap. I fumbled for the one thing I had, the only proof that mattered. I began to hum. It was a pathetic attempt, a tuneless, breathy rendition of the frantic, chaotic rhythm from my dream. The rhythm I had heard leaking from her studio, the rhythm that matched the ghost code. I hummed the pattern of falling buildings and panicked heartbeats, my eyes locked on hers. For a moment, she remained perfectly still. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned back to her console and tapped a single panel. A sound filled the chamber. It was not the deep pulse from before, but a complex, multi-layered soundscape. It was the shriek of stressed metal, the roar of fire, the crackle of energy weapons, all woven together. And underneath it all, driving it, was the very rhythm I had been humming. It was the sound from my dream, but richer, more terrifyingly complete. It was the sound of a world ending. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed, pressing my hands to my ears not to block out the noise but to hold it in, to feel its terrible truth reverberate through me. The woman cut the sound, plunging the room back into a heavy silence broken only by my ragged breathing. "My name is Lyra," she said, her tone softer now, the sharp edge of suspicion replaced by a weary curiosity. "And you are not the only one who dreams of the hawk." She gestured for me to rise, pointing to a sturdy, overturned crate. "Sit. You look like you're about to be retuned on the spot." I stumbled over and sat, my mind reeling. "What was that?" "That," she said, running a hand over her strange console, which she called the loom, "is a fragment, a piece of the real history. What you do in the archive, you sanitize it, you label it, you file it away. I listen to it. I find the pieces they tried to erase completely, the ghost code, as you call it, and I try to put them back together. I'm not a sound weaver. I'm a remembrancer." She explained that the Silentium hadn't just erased history, they had shattered it, scattering the most volatile pieces into the deep code of unrelated files, believing no one would ever find them, let alone reassemble them. For years, she had been hunting for these sonic fragments, piecing together what she called the Symphony of Collapse. "Our history isn't a quiet story of self-destruction that required benevolent saviors," she said, her eyes burning with a cold fire. "It was a war. We didn't just fall. We were pushed, and we fought back. The symbol of the shattered hawk," she told me, "was the insignia of the last human resistance. It wasn't a symbol of defeat, but of defiance of fighting, even when broken. My dream wasn't a dream. It was an echo, a genetic memory passed down through generations, a scar on our collective soul that even the Silentium couldn't completely erase." I showed her the data on my personal slate, the isolated waveform I had extracted from the ghost code. She looked at it, a slow smile spreading across her lips for the first time. It was a grim and beautiful smile. "You're a natural," she said. "Most people can't even perceive the ghost code, let alone isolate it. That hum you made, that's the chorus of screams. I found it a year ago in the data logs of a failed agricultural project." She had other pieces, too. The glass cadence, a high-frequency chime that was the sound of a city's windows all shattering at once. The static requiem, the sound of a billion voices cut off simultaneously. But the symphony was incomplete. "I have the melody of the fall," she explained, her expression turning serious again. "But I'm missing the beat, the heart of the song. There's a percussive track, a deep, driving rhythm that holds it all together. The archives call it the seismic pulse. It's not just the sound of explosions and artillery. It's the sound of our ancestors marching, the sound of their defiance. It's the heartbeat." She looked at me, her stormy eyes pinning me in place. "The fragments I've found were scattered in the low-priority civic archives, easy to access for someone like me, if you know what to look for. But the heartbeat, a fragment that powerful, that fundamental, they wouldn't have just scattered it. They would have locked it away, somewhere safe, somewhere quiet." My blood ran cold as I understood her meaning. "The core archive," I breathed. "The repository for pre-Silentium military and command data." It was the most secure place in the Enclave, a data vault so heavily guarded and firewalled that even high-order archivists needed special clearance to access it. Clearance I could never get. They think it's just raw data, the unintelligible noise of a forgotten war, Lyra said. But hidden inside it, woven into the chaos, is the one sound that could make the symphony whole. The sound that could remind everyone what it means to have a human heart that beats in defiance, not just in compliance. She turned to me, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her loom. "You've been living your whole life in the quiet, Kaylin, but you hear the song. You're the only other person I've ever met who does. I can find the notes, but I can't get to the source. You can. You're an archivist. You know the systems. You can walk through the front door." My journey to find the Sound Weaver was over. But a new, far more terrifying path was opening before me. She wanted me to go back to the heart of the silence, to the place where all the ghosts were caged, and steal the one ghost that could teach the world how to scream again. Returning to the archive was like stepping back into a dream I had fought to escape. The pristine white corridors seemed brighter, more oppressive. The soft, ambient hum of harmony felt like a physical weight on my shoulders, a constant pressure to conform, to be still. Every warden I passed, with their placid smiles and serene, empty eyes, sent a jolt of pure terror through me. Before, they were simply a part of the landscape, a gentle authority. Now, I saw them as what they were, the shepherds of a silent flock, and I was a wolf trying desperately to act like a sheep. Lyra had been clear. My sudden, unexplained absence would have already been flagged. Returning as if nothing had happened was not an option. I needed a story, a reason for my breach of protocol. My cover was a fabrication of beautiful, harmonious logic. I had experienced a minor dissonant episode, a wave of acute anxiety triggered by my work with the historical data, recognizing the danger to my own harmony and that of the Enclave. I had isolated myself in a vacant residential pod in a low-traffic sector, engaging in deep meditation until the episode passed. It was the perfect lie because it was what a model citizen should do. It showed self-awareness, responsibility, and a deep respect for the system. When I presented myself at the Archive's administrative checkpoint, the warden on duty listened to my story with a gentle, sympathetic tilt of his head. His bioscanner read my elevated heart rate and stress levels not as deception, but as the lingering effects of my episode. Your commitment to harmony is commendable, Archivist Kalen, he said in his perfectly modulated voice. However, self-treatment is not advised. A full course of retuning at the Wellness Center is mandatory for any citizen reporting dissonance. A cold dread washed over me. This was the one outcome I hadn't properly prepared for. Retuning, the very thing I was fighting to avoid. My mind raced, searching for an escape. Of course, I said, forcing a calm I did not feel. I will report to the Wellness Center immediately after my debriefing. I believe it is my duty to first help my superiors understand the specific data string that triggered my instability. It may be a previously unidentified dissonant catalyst that could affect other archivists. It was a gamble, a desperate appeal to their obsession with order and control. To my profound relief, it worked. The idea of an unknown variable, a rogue piece of data that could disrupt their perfect system, was more alarming to the warden than my minor infraction. He made a note on his slate and reactivated my access credentials, directing me to report to High Archivist Ilara for my debriefing. High Archivist Ilara was the closest thing the Silentium had to a human face of authority. She was a woman whose age was impossible to determine, her features smooth and unlined, her posture unnervingly perfect. She resided in the Archive's central spire, a sterile chamber where the only decoration was the slow, hypnotic swirl of data streams projected onto the curved walls. She listened to my fabricated story without interruption, her fingers steepled before her, her gaze analytical and cold. "Show me the file," she commanded when I had finished. I called up the London Civic collapse data, the primary layer of flickering, chaotic images. I pointed to the section where I had discovered the anomaly, careful to hide the fact that I had already isolated and copied the ghost code. "The dissonance is concentrated here," I explained, my voice a carefully crafted mixture of professional detachment and residual distress. A subliminal sonic frequency embedded in the visual corruption. It's aggressive. Ilara leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she ran her own diagnostics. The Archive's superior software immediately flagged the same anomaly I had found, the same unparsable data string. For a moment, she was silent, her focus absolute. "Intriguing," she murmured. "It is structured, yet illogical, a paradox. It radiates a detectable emotional charge, rage." She looked up at me, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than placid authority in her gaze. It was a cold, academic curiosity, the look of a biologist examining a particularly unusual virus under a microscope. Your sensitivity is a liability, archivist, but in this instance, it has proven useful. This anomaly requires further study. You are to be temporarily reassigned. You will work under my direct supervision to analyze this emotional contagion. She paused, her eyes seeming to look straight through me. Your retuning will be postponed until this task is complete. We cannot afford to dull the instrument that found the flaw. I walked out of her office feeling like I had just survived a fall from a great height. I was not retuned. I was promoted. I had been given a cage made of the very bars I sought to break. My new workstation was adjacent to Alara's own, a high-security pod with access to the archive's deepest, most restricted databases. For days, I played the part of the diligent, recovering archivist. Under Alara's watchful eye, I ran endless, fruitless diagnostic cycles on the chorus of screams, pretending to be baffled by its structure, all while secretly mapping the core archive's internal security protocols. The core was even more formidable than Lyra had imagined. It wasn't just firewalls and encryption, it was a living system, a form of bio-digital code that actively monitored the intent of anyone who accessed it. A search for seismic pulse or heartbeat would trigger an immediate lockdown. To find the fragment, I couldn't search for it directly. I had to search for the space around it. I began to look for patterns not in what was there, but in what was missing. I cross-referenced battle data, troop movements, and ordnance logs from the final days of the war. Lyra had said the heartbeat was the sound of defiance, of marching. I started searching for records of the largest recorded human troop movements, the final, desperate stands of the human resistance, and I found a hole. A 12-hour period during the siege of a place called Citadel Prime where all audio-visual records from the human side went completely dark. For 12 hours, the Silentium archives only had their own data weapons fire, energy readings, atmospheric telemetry, but the human side, the side with the shattered hawk insignia, was a void. 12 hours of perfect, impossible silence in the middle of the loudest battle in human history. That was it. The fragment wasn't a file hidden among other files. It was an absence. The Silentium hadn't just locked the sound away, they had erased the entire context around it, creating a digital black hole they hoped no one would ever look into. Getting the data out was the next impossibility. The core archive was a closed system. Data could be transferred out when it could be transferred in. That was its one subtle vulnerability. New acquisitions were still being processed. Old data formats converted and absorbed into the main system. The key was a protocol I discovered in the archive's most ancient logs, the Sonic Synchronization Mandate. In the early days, to prevent data degradation, new audio files were synchronized with a master carrier wave, a baseline frequency that ran through the entire system. It was an obsolete, inefficient protocol, long since abandoned but never purged from the core's foundational code. It was a forgotten backdoor. My plan was terrifyingly simple. I couldn't pull the heartbeat out, but maybe I could make it sing. I would need Lyra's help. During my designated rest cycles, I made my way back to the underbelly of Sector Gamma. I told Lyra everything Alara, the temporary promotion, the data black hole, the synchronization protocol. Her expression grew grimmer with each detail. They didn't just cage the beast, she murmured, looking at the complex schematics I had mapped out. They built the whole zoo around it, but you found a crack in the bars. She understood the plan immediately. We couldn't broadcast the heartbeat itself, but we could use the old protocol to our advantage. I would need to initiate a system-wide diagnostic of the obsolete carrier wave, a process that would require me to feed it a new, complex sonic pattern to test its integrity. The pattern I would feed it would be the rest of the Symphony of Collapse, the Chorus of Screams, the Glass Cadence, the Static Requiem, all the fragments Lyra had painstakingly collected and woven together on her loom. The symphony is incomplete, Lyra explained, her eyes alight with a brilliant fire. It's full of holes, designed to sync with a missing rhythm. When you feed it into the carrier wave, the core system will recognize the missing component. It will see the heartbeat the data in that black hole as the only thing that can complete the pattern. It will try to synchronize them. I finished. The audacity of the plan making my head spin. It will pull the heartbeat from its prison and broadcast it across the entire archive network as part of the diagnostic test. For one brief moment, every speaker, every terminal, every warden's comm unit in the entire archive would play the true song of humanity's last stand. It would be an act of unimaginable dissonance, a sonic bomb detonated in the heart of their silent world. But there was a catch. Initiating a core diagnostic of that magnitude required the highest level of command clearance, the High Archivist's own credentials. I would have to get them from Alara herself. The final piece of the puzzle was the most dangerous. I had to force Alara's hand. I returned to my work, and instead of just pretending to analyze the ghost code, I began to solve it. I used my deep knowledge of the archive's systems to painstakingly decrypt small, isolated bits of the Chorus of Screams, presenting them to Alara as harmless, decontextualized sonic artifacts. I gave her the sound of a single pane of glass shattering, the echo of one scream, the crackle of one energy discharge. I presented them as proof that I was making progress, that her faith in me was warranted. It was a slow, agonizing process of feeding the monster just enough to keep it interested, but not enough to let it see the whole picture. Alara was fascinated. She saw the fragments not as history, but as pure, weaponized emotion. She believed she could learn to control it, to synthesize it, to create a new form of harmony through the perfect application of emotional control. She was so blinded by her intellectual arrogance, her belief in her own ability to contain and understand the chaos, that she couldn't see what I was building. The moment came on the 10th cycle. I presented Alara with a final, decrypted fragment. I believe I have isolated the core frequency. I lied, my voice steady despite the frantic pounding in my chest. But it is highly unstable. To fully neutralize it, I need to understand its resonant properties. I need to run a comparison against a stable baseline. The old carrier wave protocol is the only system robust enough to handle the volatility. Alara considered this, her cold eyes fixed on the waveform I had fabricated on my screen. I had designed it to look like a virus, a piece of code on the verge of catastrophic collapse. A system-wide diagnostic is a significant disruption to harmony, she said. The risk is substantial. The risk of this contagion spreading is greater, I countered, my voice firm. We have been studying the symptom. High Archivist. It is time to examine the disease itself. I watched as she weighed her options, her perfect, serene face a mask of cold calculation. The fate of our rebellion, the future of our past, rested on this one moment, on this one woman's hubris. Finally, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. Very well, Archivist. Prepare the diagnostic. You will initiate it from my terminal, under my direct supervision. She turned and entered her private command codes into the console, her back to me. The system chimed, granting me temporary High Archivist clearance. I had the keys to the kingdom. and I was about to burn it to the ground. The air in Ilara's spire was cold, recycled, and utterly still. It felt like the breath of a tomb. I stood before her console, the swirling data streams on the walls reflecting in the polished black surface, their calm, hypnotic patterns a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. My hands, which had been trembling for days, were now unnervingly steady. The fear had not vanished. It had crystallized into something hard and sharp purpose. Ilara stood a few feet behind me, a silent, statuesque observer, her presence a constant, oppressive weight. She believed she was supervising a delicate surgical procedure on a rogue piece of data. She had no idea she was about to witness a resurrection. "The diagnostic sequence is prepared, High Archivist," I said, my voice echoing the sterile and formal tones of the archive. "I am loading the unstable frequency, the contagion, as the test sample." I keyed in the command, and on the main screen, a complex waveform appeared. It was the Symphony of Collapse, the beautiful, horrible song Lyra had woven from the ghosts of our past. To Ilara, it was just a chaotic, meaningless string of dissonant code. To me, it was a prayer. "Initiate the synchronization with the master carrier wave," Ilara commanded, her voice betraying not a hint of emotion. This was it. I placed my finger on the activation panel. In this moment, I was a fulcrum upon which two worlds pivoted: the silent, orderly present, and the loud, defiant past. I thought of my dream, of the burning sky and the shattered hawk. I thought of Lyra in her dark, humming chamber, her hands dancing across the loom, breathing life back into the dead. I thought of the generations of humans who had lived and died under this enforced tranquility, their passions muted, their hearts beating in quiet compliance. I pressed the panel. For a single agonizing second, nothing happened. The spire remained silent. The data streams continued their placid swirl. A cold knot of failure tightened in my stomach. Had we miscalculated? Was the ancient protocol too deeply buried? The system too intelligent? Ilara took a half step forward, a flicker of what might have been disappointment in her eyes. "It seems the protocol is non-responsive." She never finished the sentence. It began not as a sound, but as a feeling, a deep, resonant vibration that started in the floor and climbed up through the soles of my feet, into my bones. It was a pulse, slow and powerful, like the beat of a colossal heart. Then came the sound. It was not the shriek of the symphony I had uploaded. It was something else, something deeper, primal. It was the sound of 1,000 heavy boots stamping on broken pavement in perfect, unified rhythm. It was the sound of war drums hammered by giants. It was the sound of a species rising from its knees. It was the heartbeat, the core system, in its cold, impartial logic, had done exactly what Lyra predicted. It had recognized the gaping hole in the symphony's rhythm and, following its ancient programming, had pulled the corresponding data from the black hole to complete the pattern. The heartbeat, the sound they had tried to erase, was now the carrier wave. And as the carrier wave, it was being broadcast. Everywhere. The sound erupted from every speaker in the spire, not loud but impossibly vast. A sound that filled every cubic inch of the air. Ilara staggered back, her serene composure finally shattering. For the first time, I saw an emotion on her face, pure, uncomprehending shock. Her hands flew to her ears, not in pain, but in a reflexive gesture against a sound her mind could not process. The swirling data streams on the walls flickered and died, replaced by a single, stark image, the waveform of the heartbeat, a jagged, powerful, living line. Then the rest of the symphony crashed into it. The chorus of screams, the glass cadence, the static requiem, all of Lyra's fragments slammed into the heartbeat, sinking with it, locking into place. The full song of the collapse, the anthem of the last resistance, was playing at full volume in the sanctum of the Silentium. The sound was a physical force. It was the sound of defiance incarnate, the collective roar of a people who had chosen to burn rather than to fade. It was the most terrifying, most beautiful thing I had ever heard. "What have you done?" Elara shrieked, her voice thin and reedy against the tidal wave of sound. The mask was gone. Beneath the high archivist was just a frightened woman, her placid world crumbling around her. I turned to face her, the thunderous, defiant march of our ancestors echoing in my chest. "I reminded you," I said, my voice clear and strong over the din. "We didn't just fall, we fought." The archive's internal alert systems began to blare, a pathetic, high-pitched alarm against the deep, driving rhythm of the heartbeat. Red lights flashed, casting the spire in a hellish glow. Wardens would be coming, but it was already too late. The song was out. It was not just in the archive. The carrier wave was linked, on a foundational level, to every communication system in the Enclave. From the central plaza to the hydroponic gardens, from the artist sector to the residential pods, the song was playing. For the first time in centuries, the citizens of Enclave 7 were hearing a sound that was not harmonious, not gentle, not designed to soothe. They were hearing the truth. My comm unit, a device that had only ever emitted soft chimes and modulated voices, crackled to life. It was Lyra. Her voice was strained, breathless, shouting to be heard over the sound of her own broadcast. "It's working, Kaylin, it's working. People are coming out of their pods. They're just standing there, listening. They're looking at the sky." She was right. On one of the few security monitors that hadn't been shorted out, I could see images from the public squares. Citizens dressed in their identical gray tunics were standing frozen on the pristine pathways, their heads tilted as if listening to a long-forgotten language. Some looked frightened, others looked confused. But on the faces of a few, I saw something else, a dawning recognition, a flicker of some ancient, buried ember beginning to glow in their eyes. The dream of the shattered hawk was not mine alone. It was ours, days. We all carried the scar. "The contagion is spreading," Elara whispered, her face pale with horror. She was looking at the same monitors. She finally understood. This wasn't a data breach. It was an awakening. Her gaze snapped to me, her eyes filled with a cold, pure hatred. "You have broken the harmony. You have brought the screaming times back." "You can't break what was already broken," I shot back. "You just built a quiet room over a mass grave and called it peace." With a snarl of fury, she lunged for her console, her fingers flying across a security panel. "I will purge the system. I will erase this filth, and I will erase you with it." Heavy metal blast doors began to descend, sealing the spire. The music cut off abruptly as she severed the core's connection to the Enclave's network. We were trapped, plunged into a sudden, shocking silence that was somehow more deafening than the song had been. But the silence lasted only a moment. From far below, through the thick, soundproofed walls of the spire, a new sound began to rise. It was faint at first, a distant, chaotic murmur. It was the sound of voices, thousands of them, not screaming, not yet, but talking, shouting, calling out to one another. It was the sound of a city that had been asleep for generations beginning to stir. The sound seemed to rob Ilara of her strength. She slumped against her console, her authority gone, leaving only a zealot whose faith had been shattered. "They will destroy themselves," she said, her voice hollow. "It is their nature. We gave them peace." "You gave them a cage," I said, walking slowly towards her. "You feared our chaos, so you cut out our hearts. But you forgot something. A heart doesn't just beat in anger or fear. It beats with courage. It beats with love. It beats with hope. That's what you're hearing, Ilara, not the screaming times. The sound of 100,000 human hearts starting to beat again. The blast doors sealed with a final, booming thud. We were locked in the spire, high above the awakening city. The flashing red lights painted a grim tableau, the broken ideologue and the reluctant revolutionary, trapped together at the epicenter of a world changing forever. The fight for the archive was over, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that the war for our future was just beginning. The wardens would be at the door soon, and they would not be coming with gentle words and offers of retuning. They would come to enforce the silence, and for the first time in my life, I had no desire to be quiet. I looked around the spire, at the dead consoles and sealed doors, and I felt not fear, but a strange, exhilarating clarity. I had been an archivist of the dead. Now, I would be a soldier for the living.